And this thing stopped about 200 feet over my house. It was an orb at least 30 feet in diameter. And it was this weird, liquid, bluish, white, glowing color. And then it just vanished. It just disappeared. And I remember trying to stay in the moment and look at the spot where it was. And then I would like look at my friends and look at the yard. I'm like, okay, this is real, and look back. And the weird thing, because I was intently focused on it, it was invisible at this point, but my eyes were tracking, even though I couldn't see it. And then when it appeared again, my eyes were looking directly at it. And I remember thinking, that's weird. My eyes are tracking it, even though I can't physically see it. I know it's still here. And then the light came back on, and it was rising in elevation. And I remember I had this like moment of like primordial terror. And I remember looking at my friends and looking at it and thinking, oh my God, is it going to take us?
Welcome back. I'm here again with Jeff Nuccetelli. Jeff, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right. So if you're watching now and you have not seen the prior episode about, we could probably call it the nuts and bolts-ish report account of what happened at Vandenberg on October 14th, 2023, and then incidents after that. There was also some high strangeness associated with it, so we kind of separated the episodes. But if you haven't watched that, watch that episode first so you have the background. But Jeff, you said there's lots of high strangeness associated with these incidents. So let's just start from the top when you first noticed some of this stuff.
So one thing that I didn't correlate that might be involved with the UFOs at Vandenberg, we had two gates on the south end of the base, Solvang Gate and South Gate. And there was a road that ran between those two gates. There was a public road that, anybody, civilian could drive down that road. And when they got to the end, there was an Amtrak train station right on the beach. And overlooking that Amtrak train station is our main launch facility where the Vandenberg Dark Square happened. So between this road are these two gate shacks, and they control entry onto and off the base. And they're manned 24 hours a day. And a really good friend of mine that was on Bravo flight during all these incursions, he was on, I think it's South Gate, looking at Solvang Gate across this road. And one night he calls over the radio and he asked for somebody to immediately come down to his gate shack. So I respond down. I get to the gate shack, and my buddy is telling me, he's like, dude, I don't know what's happening, but every once in a while, we had these big steel light poles around the gate shack to illuminate the area. And they're like 8 inches in diameter. They're like probably 30 or 40 feet high. And they would start to rock. And he said the weird thing was some of them would be rocking and other ones near them would just be perfectly still. And they were rocking like significantly. They're like creaking and groaning and rattling and making all this noise. And he says, every time I'd get ready to call it in, they would just stop on a dime. And then I'd be like, okay. And I'd sit down, and a few minutes later, 1 or 2 or maybe 3 at a time would just all in sync, just start to gang, 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 gang. Really weird. So as he's telling me the story, I'm standing right there with him at the gate. It happens. The pole right in front of us just starts violently rocking. And we're just looking at it, like, what's going on? What is happening? Now, when this was happening, it's dark and foggy. So there's a marine layer, above us. We can't see the night sky. We can't see the moon. or anything. It's this weird, spooky environment to begin with, and then you have these light poles rocking. So we called another patrol, another buddy of ours, to come down. Like, you guys got to see this. We're putting it over the net.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at baen.com.
And as soon as our buddy pulled up, it stopped. I mean, just on a dime. Like, it's anomalous, because if something is just rocking, eventually it'll lose energy and motion and it'll come to. This was just rocking violently and then just boom.
And by the way, if you had all those light poles with the, next to each other, right? If one started rocking like a pendulum like that, the rest of them should have started to mimic that behavior. The fact that there was only one and then it didn't, like, not orbit, but didn't decay, it's unnatural.
Yeah. And then, after the third person showed up, or maybe it was 4 people at that point, we're talking, and then it would start again. And it got even weirder. Like, all 3 would start moving, and then 2 would stop and 1 would move. And it was like they were dancing for us, right? It was really disconcerting and bizarre.
And what were the materials of these light poles?
They're steel or metal. I mean, they're big, robust concrete,
Right.
Into the ground. And you could probably go on Google Maps and see what I'm talking about. They're big. They're like 30 or 40 feet tall. And that happened multiple times. That was sort of the kind of things at Vandenberg that would happen. And they became like just normal after a while. Like, oh, the light poles are changing again. But we had one event at that same gate shack with the same person, a good friend of mine. And he's another guy, hyper credible, had an amazing career, squared away guy. After he retired, he became a contractor with the TS secret clearance. And he would go around to like big companies like Lockheed, and he was in charge of making sure they were in compliance with security protocols. So not the kind of person that's out making up tales, and these things happen to him quite often. And we had another incident, the wildest thing that ever happened. I almost don't want to tell it without him being there because it's so unbelievable. But he was on duty at that same gate one night. He hears a spectacular car crash happen right down the road. He can't see it, but he hears these cars crashing and tumbling and everything breaking and glass flying. And he calls it in. Oh my God, we got a major vehicle accident somewhere close to my gate. Can't see it. I respond. Everybody responds. It's late at night. After he hears the crash and we're responding, he calls in over the radio that a woman has walked up to his gate shack. She was involved in a crash. She's injured severely. She's bleeding from the head. She's all banged up. She staggers up to the gate shack. She's hysterical. I need help. Oh my God. Oh my God. He's calling this in over the radio. And then she runs off back down the road. And he's telling her, wait here. Patrols are coming. The ambulance is en route. Just stay here. She refuses, and she runs back down the highway. He can't follow her because he cannot leave his post. I get there. The other patrols get there. We start to frantically drive up and down this strip of highway. There are no cars. We can't find anything.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
We're talking to him. He's like, no, I heard it. It's got to be within 100 yards of me. It was so loud. I heard the whole thing. And she ran off in that direction. So time is going by. We've driven all the way to Lompoc, which is the town that connects to that road. We've driven all the way up to the train station. And now we're out on foot. We've got our dogs out. We've got the county involved. We're looking all over for this woman and this crash. And we never found anything.
Was there ever a crash in the past?
There have been wrecks. That whole region, we had more vehicle accidents in that area than I've ever experienced in my career. Because of the fog, it's windy canyon roads. There's wet conditions all the time. So I don't know how many fatal accidents I've been on those highways, but just innumerable. But this case, we never found her. We never found the car. We never found any debris. We never found anything. And then we were just standing there in the dark of night, all of us talking like, what happened? Why was there a bloody woman talking to you? Where'd she go?
What happened to this guy? I mean, did he get in trouble for it? Did they try to portray it like a prank?
It was 100% real. I mean, we had the county, we had Lompoc PD looking. The other gate shack, Southgate, they're maybe 100 yards away from each other. He heard it too.
Okay.
So it wasn't like he cried wolf. And he's not the kind of person that would ever do that. Like nobody would have ever thought this guy's playing a prank like that. And that was one of those things that just stays with you. The incident is over, but it's not. There's no closure. Who's this woman? Where is she? Where's the wreck? What happened? So that was like the craziest, high strangeness event that we ever.
Did he describe the woman?
Yeah, he called in. I mean, he was.
What did she look like? Like what?
With our dispatcher as he was talking to him.
So the dispatcher could hear her.
I don't know. That's why I'd like to have all them on.
Yeah.
When I tell these stories, I don't remember all the details. But he was, she's 5 foot whatever and whatever color hair, and she's got a laceration here and looks like her arm might be broken and her clothes are ripped and she's hysterical. And he's calling this in. And then she runs off into the night and we never find her or the car. And it's like, what was that? Was that a ghost? Is she still lying out there in the weeds?
Yeah, I would be very curious about geomagnetic anomalies and the composition of the topography. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And with the light poles, that was my primary thing. There are train tracks that run right through there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, maybe that's picking up from the Amtrak and there's some kind of weird vibration where it's only hitting some light poles.
Or maybe the iron in the train track is creating a right-hand rule, right? Like Faraday's law of induction, right? Creating a magnetic field that's doing this. I don't know.
And that was always our first thing, is to try to figure out, to analyze the situation. What could this be, right? What could it be? And a lot of times, sometimes with the light poles, we just kind of blew it off. Like it's weird. It's seismic activity or it's a train but then that's why I was telling the story about the woman. Then you have that.
Yeah, you can't explain
and
that.
There's nowhere to go with that. We don't know what to do. We put ourselves in this weird position because now local law enforcement's involved. They're calling us. They want details. And we're like, we don't know what happened,
Well, I mean, a crazy theory, run with me here, right, is that there could be certain materials, certain geologic formations, right? That in effect are recorders of reality, right? And which is why I was asking about a prior accident. Maybe it was just, a surge in the local magnetic field, and it just plays these events. They call it death echoes, whatever you want to call it. I'm not saying that's what it is. It's just there might be something about the topography of this particular area.
Yeah.
That lends, kind of like Skinwalker Ranch, or just Skinwalker Ranch is basically shaped like a parabolic antenna, basically, right? It's a bowl kind of, or has like a bowl like topography, and maybe there's something, and maybe there's like lots of
quartz and
granite.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, 100%. So again, I'm just speculating. What other sort of events, high Strangeness, were tied to some of this?
A lot of things like that. Like I mentioned before, it was sort of well known that if you're out in the fog, depending on where you are on the base, you could hear drumming and chanting like Native American. And that area was a traditional Chumash Indian tribal land. And there's actually a spot, it's called Tranquillian Peak, located on the coast. I think it's the highest point of elevation on the coast of California, if I'm not mistaken. But it's this rocky spire of cliff that goes up. I forget the elevation, but it's very, very high. And there's a cave on top of that mountain. And inside the cave, it looks like a Chumash sacred site. There's geoglyphs, there's rock art, there's like sighting holes where you could look through the cave wall at stars and celestial bodies. So that's there. So, it's like this was definitely some kind of sacred site, right? But right next to that cave on top of the mountain is a deep space tracking site. And it's like, I don't know, is that a coincidence just because of the elevation? But, so there's a lot of history there with the Native Americans that we don't know about, right?
Right.
And then you have these ghost stories about hearing drums, and you hear chanting, and you see ghostly figures, a lot of things like that, where, you're out in the dark patrolling and you think you see somebody walk by a building or walk into a building. And then you go and check and the door's locked and the building's empty. Weird 911 calls that come in with voices that sound like they're disembodied and broken, but they're asking for help. A lot of things like that happen where we're trying to back calculate where the number's coming from and get an address, and then we would respond and the building's empty, but the controller still has somebody on the line begging for help.
So they would go to an empty house, basically?
That happened to me in Japan, and it happened at
So was the house like abandoned, or is it just nobody's home?
Own the house. Yeah. We had one in Japan like that. I'll never forget this one. It was pouring down rain. And I heard the call coming through. And it was very weak and broken statically, but you could hear them ask, I need help, please come and get me. I can't get off the floor. And we spent like an hour finding out where the phone line was coming from. And it was calling from an area in Japan on the base called The Hill, where a lot of ghost stories happen. I could tell you a couple. But this particular night, pouring down rain, it was in our play area where there was nothing out there except for cement slabs where we would put up tents and structures when we would go play war. It was like a war fighting exercise area. Pouring down rain. We get out there, and they're giving us a serial number that goes to a call box where you could hook up a landline. We finally find it. It's just a concrete slab with a wooden pole where you could hook up a phone. And there's nothing there. And we're standing in the rain, in the dark, looking at this pad. We're verifying the number. And the person on the line with the dispatcher is telling the dispatcher, yeah, your guys are here. I know that they can see me, but it looks like they're lost and they don't see me. And the controller's telling us on the radio, you're right on top of them. He should be laying on the ground right there. And we're like, dude, there's no phone here and there's nobody out. So things like that.
Have you seen the Shawn Ryan episode where he interviews an exorcist?
I saw part of that.
Did you see the part of the episode where he says that he gets text messages from these entities? And they go and calls and they go and they investigate, and same exact MO in terms of.
I didn't see that part. I saw part of it. He was talking to the priest. And I also saw the one, I'm trying to find it, where Sean talks about his UAP sighting that him and his wife had. And he has a video. I think it was a Sedona.
Yeah, I haven't seen that episode. But just watch toward the, definitely check it out, because this is not the first time I've heard about this. And I'm not saying that what you're experiencing is also demonic or whatever, but this is not the first time I've ever heard this. And that's the first time in that interview. I mean, it's creepy. Like, he would get taunted by these entities.
Yeah.
They would text him. And they would text him from, numbers that didn't exist, or from non-existent phones and phone lines and things like that. So it appears to be, I don't know, maybe it's just, it could be, I don't know. I could speculate all night long about what's going on. Maybe it's just a parallel dimension that's out of phase, and, who knows?
Who knows? Yeah, but those things pile up. And then a couple from Misawa, my good buddy, his name is Chico. He was in a weapons storage area conducting an exercise. So he was pretending to be the bad guy that broke into the area, is going to blow up the munitions.
Op 4.
Yeah, he was Op 4. And my buddies were deploying, and it was this combat scenario at nighttime in the weapons storage facility. And I don't remember all the exact details, but what happened was the guys going after the Op 4 got him triangulated, like, okay, we know he's here. And then when they got done with the exercise, they realized that they had been tracking the Op 4, but they had also been tracking this other figure that was kind of ghosting my buddy Chico. And Chico had seen him too and thought it was one of us. But in the end, we realized that Chico was the only Op 4 in the area, and whoever the ghostly figure running around was not us or him. And Chico kept running into him as he was like maneuvering through the area and thinking it was us. And we were thinking it was him, and it ends up it was neither. So we never found out who that person was in the weapons storage area that night. But we were all calling him in, this ghostly figure. And after Chico, we were all like rallied up, and we were doing like a debrief after the exercise, what we did right and wrong. It all came out, and Chico was terrified out of his mind because it kind of all synced. He's like, oh my God, I was in there with something or somebody that wasn't you guys. And we had multiple stories about seeing apparitions in that weapons storage facility. And then another one that I remember very clearly, it involved my supervisor. His name was Jack. I won't say his last name. He was in that same area called the Hill where we had our intel facility. And there was a thing called the elephant cage. You could probably Google it. It's a gigantic round structure. It's an antenna made of wood. It looks like a roller coaster. It looks like, how the old roller coasters were made with lumber. It was like that, like maybe 50 feet high. So it was this huge, giant, round antenna. That's why they called it the elephant cage. It looked like you could put like Godzilla in the middle. And then there was a road around that, and then a gate to get in. And then in the middle of the elephant cage was a tower that we had to climb up, and there was a guard shack at the top. And we would just sit there and guard the area at night. And eventually they closed that down, and we only had to drive around the perimeter. So one night, Jack is the area supervisor. He's a two-man armed team. And then I think they had somebody in the tower in the middle. And Jack's job was to patrol the outside, and he had all these different areas he was responsible for. And I was pretty young. This is probably in like 1994. I was on a close boundary in the intel building. So I'm just walking around outside with my gun inside the area. He's outside of the area patrolling this big region. So he goes to conduct a check on the elephant cage, and he calls in. There's a figure walking around the perimeter road. We're going to go respond. So this triggers a response because this is a protection level 1 resource, meaning top level protection, the most critical asset we have. Everybody starts to respond because nobody can be near that area. And as Jack and his partner get close, again, all hell breaks loose. He calls it in, screaming, "Oh my God, he's got no legs, he's floating." And he's screaming, "It's a body, but there's no legs. Oh my God, it's a ghost. Oh my God, it's coming right towards the truck. Oh my God, it's chasing us." And I'm in an area about a quarter mile away, standing watching through the fence. His truck and the lights just go bananas around this thing. Other people are calling in, trying to figure out what's going on. He's literally calling in a ghost over the radio. And then the thing vanishes. The flight chief comes out. They call Jack in. "What the hell's going on? Have you lost your goddamn mind?" He's swearing on his life, and so is his partner. "Dude, it was a ghost. And we chased it, and then it came after us and went right over the truck. It was going around." And it's like, okay, what is it? So that was the weird thing for me, right? Like, I'm this young 19-year-old kid
Right.
with my gun, doing my job, and I'm being bombarded with all this high strangeness. And these people are not making it up. They're not pulling a prank. They're not trying to get themselves in trouble, because they're screwing around with protection level 1 resources. You don't do that. You don't play jokes around nukes, right? You don't do that. You will end your career. You'll get in trouble. You might lose rank. You might get your clearance taken. Right? We play a lot of jokes in the Air Force. It's constant, like, shenanigans, but not like that. Right? So that was my career. It's like every once in a while, it's a regular day, and then it's like, oh my God, there's a UFO. Oh my God, there's a ghost. And you're just like, what is happening?
So how did this get reported? Did they write it up, or did they just say, let's just ignore
it in the blotter? Because there was literally an armed response, and we put everything in the blotter. And that's why I try to tell people, even if we would get calls like, "Hey, I was on my way to work and a bunch of deer ran out and I swerved and missed them." And we said, "Okay, any damage?" No, I just want to let you guys know. And we would put that in the blotter. Name, type of car, all his info. He almost hit a deer. We recorded everything. And that's the frustrating thing for me with the Air Force and Aero and the government. They are deleting all those records of ghost stories and UFOs and high strangeness.
Who's they?
The government, the Air Force.
So were they deleting it prior to Aero, or is there like this, they're just retroactively as part of Aero
I'm not sure when the records retention policies have changed or if I'm misremembering, but law enforcement sensitive data was usually kept in perpetuity. And here's why. Because let's say I put somebody in jail 10 years ago. They had some drugs. They got into a DUI. They crashed a car, injured somebody, civilian. I'm on the case. I did the police report. I was a drug recognition expert, so certified to be an expert witness in court. I came out. I did all my paperwork. This person was tried, convicted, and let's say they've got 15 years in jail, and they're still there. The Air Force, what they're doing now, 7 years, they're deleting and destroying all the records of that incident. The police report, the witness statements, the accident report from the car, the evidence received from the drugs. They're just saying, oh, we retained them for 7 years, not needed anymore. And they are deleting them. Which I can't wrap my mind around it. Because what if his lawyer needs those records? People go to jail. People have lawsuits because they were assaulted or attacked or in a wreck. And sometimes these things play out 10, 15, 20 years later. And the government's position is, oh, sorry, after the trial, we just deleted everything, including the blotter. The initial call that like, hey, there was a wreck and people were injured, and here's the data. Gone. So when I went to Aero, my hope was they're going to be able to go back and I could give them a general time frame. I was in Japan in 94, check the blotters from that base, look for my name, look for blue orb. They can't do that. Go back to 2003, pull all the Boeing contractor statements. Don't worry about my recollection. They should be in a file. You can read exactly what they said and saw. Gone. What about the blotter? Gone. What about the statements? Gone. All of it. So that's the problem. I could tell stories all day long. And the thing is, with my stories, almost every one involved other credible witnesses. Many of them happened while on duty. And almost every one was called in and recorded. There's documents that should be there about my weird 911 calls and my ghost stories because they happened and they were recorded and reported. And the Air Force, like, sorry, we don't keep records after 7 years.
What was your sense of Aero? Really, I don't want to derail us too much, but were they really out to get the truth, or were they a counterintelligence operation?
Maybe a bit of both. I think that my experience was positive with them. And they seemed like they were legitimately interested in it. And we've collaborated and they have shared info. And as I've tracked down more witnesses from Vandenberg, because like I said, there was at least 40 or 50 of us on duty when it happened. And then another 40 or 50 on duty with Delta Flight. And then all the people that were notified, like there's a lot of people that either saw it or know about it, right? So my hope was that Aero could help get the records and track down these people. And then we could come out publicly and be like, people are always talking about UFO encounters over nuke sites and installations. I've got right now 7 people that can tell that story in real time that lived it. They saw it. I was running around like a maniac, investigating it, taking notes. Like we could talk about what really happened, backed by evidence. But the thing with Aero, the people running Aero are not, they're listening to whoever is actually pulling the strings. And the way they've acted publicly, it's like, I don't have any confidence in them. Right. The LinkedIn posts and the attacks on with whistleblowers and their blasé attitude about everything, and their historical report that was just garbage. It was just complete garbage. I would have never turned in even like a term paper in college that poorly cited. Just there's no data, there's no cases there. It's just like conclusion after conclusion with no data to support it, no methodology. So yeah, I don't want to rant and rave too much about Aero, but I had high hopes. But I still think that there's good people there working hard to get after.
Yeah. In order to perpetrate a counterintelligence operation, you need people who are straight. They have no idea it's a counterintelligence operation, right?
So Aero is just, I don't have a lot of confidence in the government at this point, which is why what you're doing is important. Soul Foundation, Galileo Project, and on and on. That's how we need to get to the bottom. Yeah.
Now, were you ever interviewed by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations?
I don't think so. I don't remember.
Well, you said there were plainclothes people that didn't. Did they ever talk to you?
When it was happening, I don't clearly remember. But I talked to so many people, it's possible that I did talk to them because I had most of the data. I was the one running around like taking notes. But I don't remember actually sitting down with them or them asking me for my work or anything like that. I just don't remember.
And did anything strange happen to you after all these incidents at Vandenberg?
Yeah. I mean, I had my own UAP encounter at Vandenberg that we didn't get into, my own
that's
close and personal. And then I've seen the anomalous sort of spooky stuff never quit. That's happened throughout my life. And my family has a lineage of that too. Like almost every woman in my family, almost every single one has had anomalous experiences, not UFO related, but high strangeness.
Where's your family originally from? At least that line.
Well, we've got Italian and Irish on my dad's side, and my mother's side is English and maybe some German. And then all my adult nieces all have, I think they are Cherokee. My brother-in-law is like 75% Native American. So they've got that. There's been some talk about how some Native American tribes might have.
Yeah, the Cherokee and Celtic are the two things that I think John Ramirez has been saying. Whether or not that's real or not,
like I haven't seen. I'd love to see some real data on that, some papers on that. But yeah, so there's kind of a lineage, and then my grandmother and my grandfather on my mother's side were witnesses to the Presque Isle UFO, which happened in 1968, I think.
Where was that?
That was in Lake Erie, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And that was one of the big UFO cases of the time where it was in all the papers. The FBI was involved. I think Blue Book was involved. Local police were involved. There were multiple witnesses. There was a creature seen, like a Bigfoot type creature seen. My grandparents didn't see that. They just saw the craft come in and land near the lighthouse at the park at Presque Isle. And then my father saw the Kecksburg fireball when he was gone. And that was the one, it was the fireball that came screaming in and landed in Kecksburg, which is about, I think, 40 miles from where I grew up.
Where did you grow up?
Oh, I grew up in a little coal mining town south of Pittsburgh. My dad's a coal miner.
What's the name of the town?
Scenery Hill.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little tiny village on top of a mountain. It's a town called Cokeburg, which is where they used to produce all the coke for the steel working down in the valley where that was like where my dad grew up there. And then we moved to Scenery Hill when I was a baby. So yeah, and from that Western Pennsylvania coal mining culture.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, the Appalachian Mountains are like an ancient mountain range. I think over 300 million years old, something like that.
Yeah, I think the oldest range in the world.
Yeah, and I think it used to be linked up with Northern Europe, like Ireland, and there's definitely some ancient history, but there's a lot of anomalous, like Kecksburg incident. Also was west of the Allegheny Mountains.
Yeah.
Which is just a mountain range within the Appalachians. But there's something to that. If something survived a bunch of mass extinction events, that's where whatever it is might be, would be holed up, right?
Agreed.
So I'm just speculating. I have no idea. But what other kind of stuff started happening to you after you said you had your own UAP event, but we never talked about it. What was that?
So I could talk about that one. So the whole time everything was happening at Vandenberg, I never got to actually see the craft, right?
Right.
My best friends actually did. They saw them with their own eyes. They were the people that called it in. So I was totally bummed out. Like, I just want to see it and know it's real, and I didn't. So about 2 years later, I'm still at Vandenberg. At this point in time, this is 2005. I'm the non-commissioned officer in charge of our law enforcement program. So I'd kind of gone through the ranks. I'm in a leadership position. I'm in charge of the LE program. And we think this happened around my birthday, so it would have been around April. I had a party at my house on base. I lived in base housing. All these cops were over. We had this big party. Everybody goes home. And then it's me and two of my close friends, Brandon and Phoenix. They work with me on Bravo flight. They're cops. My wife is in bed. We think it's around like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. And we're in my backyard. We've got a fire going. We're drinking beer and just talking. And we're talking about this very subject. We talk about all the weird stuff that our other friends saw. And my other friend, Brandon, that was there with me. And he lived through all these encounters too. His wife was, I think, deployed when all that happened, but she's there now. And Brandon is talking about his dad was a Navy guy. I think career Navy, did 20-something years in the Navy. Brandon was telling me a story that his dad had this spectacular UFO encounter up in Washington State in the Navy when they were little kids. And apparently, I don't have all the details, but that was a famous case that was in the papers. People from all over the region saw these craft or lights over the Navy ships. And during that encounter, Brandon's dad tried to run into the house and wake him and his brother up and his wife. And he could not wake them up. He was shaking them. Come, you gotta come and look at the thing, because it was like right outside of their house. Couldn't wake them up. So Brandon's telling me about that. We're talking about the Vandenberg incursions. And then Phoenix, Brandon's girlfriend, now wife, is like, you guys see that light? And we're like, what? And we get up and look, and again, same thing, man. We see high altitude, looks like a star. It's a clear night, and it's this bluish white twinkling light, but it's pulsing in this slow, steady rhythm. And the light looked weird. It's hard to describe. Like the way it would pulse, it would only radiate out to like a defined point. It looked like a solid marble. It didn't like shine past a point. And then it would radiate back in, and it would look like a rock hard marble of like bluish white light, like a distinct, like a marble, looked like a hard object, but it was high up like a star. And it was weird looking. And we're watching, and we're like, wow, that's weird. It's a satellite, and it's tracking slowly, moving west to east towards us. And we're watching it, and we're like, oh, is it Starlink? Is it satellite?
Again, where is this happening?
I'm on my base on Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Okay. All right.
At my house in the backyard. So over a very short period of time, it's getting closer, and it's dropping in elevation. We could tell it's getting lower and lower. It doesn't look too weird in its movement, but the light is very strange. It's got this pulse, it's steady like heartbeat. But then it starts getting bigger and brighter, and it starts to I describe it as fluttering. It starts to like a leaf flutter down. So it's dropping significantly.
I've heard that before, like a falling leaf, right?
Yeah, it's getting bigger. It's this weird, erratic, floating, fluttering movement. Then we're like, wow, this is really weird. Eventually, it gets low enough to where it's almost at the horizon and sort of like an aircraft coming in for approach. And we're like, oh my God, it's coming right at us, coming right for us. And then it was right there. And this thing stopped about 200 feet over my house. It was an orb, at least 30 feet in diameter. And it was this weird, liquid, bluish white, glowing color. And then it just vanished. It just disappeared. And I remember trying to stay in the moment and look at the spot where it was. And then I would like look at my friends and look at the yard. I'm like, okay, this is real, and look back. And the weird thing, because I was intently focused on it, it was invisible at this point, but my eyes were tracking it, even though I couldn't see it. And then when it appeared again, my eyes were looking directly at it. And I remember thinking, that's weird. My eyes are tracking it, even though I can't physically see it. I know it's still here. And then the light came back on, and it was rising in elevation. And I remember I had this like moment of like primordial terror. And I remember looking at my friends and looking at it and thinking, oh my God, is it going to take us? Just this instant of like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Is it going to take my wife? Is it going to take us? And then I kind of took a deep breath and I just focused on it and let that fear go and just stayed in the moment. And then it just tracked. It started to gently rise. And then it sort of accelerated, but not like at light speed. And we watched it go until it faded into a star and then faded into the night sky and vanished. It just went. And then it was gone. And we all looked at each other like, oh my God. We had our little like moment of what just happened. Are we crazy? Did you see that? And then I ran in the house, I picked up my landline, and I called the command center. And I was like, hey, this is Sergeant Nuccetelli. I know this sounds crazy. Here's what we just saw. I need you to call weather. I need you to call the tower. I need you to make notifications, find out if we have anything on radar. They're like, dude, it's 1 a.m. Are you joking? I'm like, dude, make the call. They called back a little bit later, like maybe 15 minutes later. They're like, we called, woke everybody up. Nothing on radar, no balloons, no aircraft. And I'm like, cool. Put this in the blotter. And when I come in the morning, I'll type up statements and I'll include them in a report for the file. Because at that time in that role, all the paperwork that we generated would come to me before it got filed. So every case, every piece of paperwork that came administratively would come to me. I would review everything, send it back for corrections, and then I would forward that to our reports and analysis section for disposition and for record keeping. So I remember, typing that up in the morning, putting it all together, talking to everybody about it, and then filing it away. There's another one. So yeah, that was my encounter.
Any other high strangeness?
A lot of sort of the same stuff with hearing audible things in the darkness, seeing apparitions. One story ended up being like real. We had a boogeyman on the base that I completely discounted because it was too unbelievable. And then if we've got time, I could tell you that story kind of shortly. That it's not.
Yeah, let's. Well, no, but it's important to realize that not all this stuff is high strangeness. It might present as high strangeness, but in fact, not many people watched it, even though they should, because you can see that people actively seek out confirmation bias. Because I actually interviewed a guy who hoaxed, who John Keel is?
Yeah.
He hoaxed John Keel.
Oh, no.
But it was one of those things. It was a college prank, and then it just kind of... it kind of had a mind of its own after a while.
Yeah.
And even when this guy tried to recant, they're like, oh, the government, people are just like, oh, the government told you to say that and stuff like that. But John Keel was so angry, this guy ended up in his book, Operation Trojan Horse. And I just happen to know the guy from some other context, and I'm reading Operation Trojan Horse, and I see his freaking name in there. I'm like, Tom is in there? So I, emailed him like, I have to interview you. So I definitely, people need to understand that there are sometimes and often natural explanations for this. Anyway, that's a long prelude to, let's hear about the boogeyman.
Even with the weird phone calls, I had one at Vandenberg that was scary as hell. Another dark, rainy, stormy night. I actually wrecked a patrol car responding to it. And it ended up being prosaic. I ended up smashing the windows out of this building to get in. We thought somebody was dying and on the line. And it ended up being an alarm had tripped something and turned on an intercom that was connected to the alarm. And the refrigerator was old and was rocking. And that's what was causing everything. And I ended up doing all this damage to this building to get in and find out it was just a refrigerator making the call. So that does happen. But here's the one I couldn't believe that ended up being real. When I first got to Vandenberg, you're meeting people. They're telling you all kind of crazy stories. Some are ghost stories. Some are wild incidents. And I kept hearing this story about this boogeyman on base, right? And the story was that it was an Air Force cop who had a mental breakdown and had gotten into a bunch of trouble and was going to be court-martialed. And he went rogue. And he had gone AWOL and was living like a wild man out in the wilderness of Vandenberg. And the stories were that you'd be out on patrol at night in a secured area and a shadowy figure would go running down the hall or through the area. And they would chase this person and they would never catch them. They would always get away. They'd get over a fence or go into the ductwork into the building and vanish. And this patrolman would spend hours tearing this building apart looking for this boogeyman. And there was enough people telling me then, like, dude, no, I saw the boogeyman. We chased the boogeyman. So there was enough there and enough people telling me that were credible, like, maybe there's something here. But it was too far-fetched that there was this rogue, off-the-grid security forces person, and, he would steal food from the chow hall and steal generators. And he had these camps that they would find out in the wilderness every once in a while, right? So years go by, maybe 2 or 3 years, and these stories started popping up again. We saw the boogeyman. He was in this building. He escaped. We chased him. But I had never seen him. I'm like, this is nonsense, right? And then one night I'm on patrol and my friend Regina, she was on patrol too. I think it was real late in the morning, like 3 a.m. And one of my other coworkers that had worked with me before, now he's an investigator. So he's a detective. And he calls the command center. He's like, hey man, I need you and 2 other patrols to come out and set up a 360 on our MPF building. That's our military personnel flight building where all the admin work is done for the base, right? And it's this big, like 4-story big brick building. And I'm like, all right, man, what's going on? He's like, we can't tell you. We're doing an investigation. We're going through collecting evidence. We need you to just set up on the building. And I'm kind of annoyed. And I'm like, fine. So we go out. And Regina was on point 1, I'm on point 2, and we had somebody else on the back of the building. And we're just parked. It's dead of night, quiet. And I'm just outside of my patrol car staring at the building. And Regina, I could see her like 100 yards or 50 yards away outside her car. And we're just in the cold. And then I could see guys with their flashlights like on the 4th floor in buildings. And I'm like, what are they doing in there? And I'm calling back. I'm like, what are they doing in there, man? And they're like, we don't know. It's all secret squirrel. They won't tell us what's going on. And then I switch to their frequency and I hear all this radio chatter. Sounds like they're chasing somebody in the building. And I'm like, oh shit, something's up, right? And then I see the lights all over the building, and there's all kind of radio traffic. And then I hear this big boom, and a door, a big metal security door, kicks open, and I just see this like ninja hauling full speed out of the building, and he's running across the field, heading right between me and Regina. And I'm like, what? And then they're calling in, he's out of the building, intercept him, get him. So I start running towards this guy. He's running full speed like a sprinter, and behind me are the woods. He's trying to get to the woods. Regina comes out. We're in a totally vulnerable position. I'm trying to find cover. And then I sprint after him. This dude is fast, and I'm like maybe 30 feet behind him running full speed, and he gets into the woods. And I'm calling it in. I get into the woods, and then he vanishes, just gone. And I'm like, oh my God. So we rally up. We get a helicopter. We get the sheriff's department. We got the dogs. I've got fire teams out with long guns. Still don't know who this dude is or what we're looking for him. We scour the area, never find him. So then in the debrief, I find out this is the boogeyman. They have been tracking this guy for years. And what had finally happened was he was breaking into the MPF building, and he was looking at porn at night. And that's how the investigators got involved. Some poor admin person came in the morning, logs on his computer, and there's porn. And he's like, oh my God, I'm going to go to jail. This wasn't me, right? So he reports it. They conduct this big investigation, and they start finding locations on base where somebody's hacking in, looking at porn. Ends up, it's this guy, and that's all real. He has camps in remote parts of the base. And then they start to pull all the threads. They start to locate the camps. And he's got all the things that have been stolen, the generators, the equipment, the tents, all kind of stuff in these camps, right? So long story short, at that point, he knew we were on to him. He got desperate, and then he took his own life. And within, I think it was a couple weeks after that, we found him. He had hung himself in one of these camps. And it was gruesome because he had been out there for quite some time, and the animals had gotten to him and stuff. It was brutal. But it ends up, this was all real. He was a cop. He had a mental breakdown. He had gotten in trouble, was going to be court-martialed, and he just ran off and was living on this base for years on his own, like a wild man. And that was all real. One of those stories, I'm like, this can't be real. It's too weird. And it was. So I take everything with a grain of salt, right? Because
right.
We were actively always trying to find out like what's really going on.
Right. Just the truth. Just figure out what the truth is.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot, man. A lot of weird.
Any final words for the audience?
So yeah, I think my biggest takeaway, like going to Seoul was really transformational. Mm-hmm. Being around people, like I met you there. I met so many people from all walks of life, you know, from the highest caliber scientists down to just regular people that have regular jobs and have never even seen anything, but they're interested. And I think it's kind of like that story I just told you, right? There are things like, they're so crazy, you're like, this can't be real. But the data builds up.
Right.
And eventually you have to make a decision whether you're going to ignore the data and the evidence and just stay in your closed-minded box, like, I don't want to know. But there's enough people out there, and the stigma has dropped enough now to where people are comfortable talking about the anomalous. You've even seen Tucker Carlson come out, and he's talking about being ravaged by a demon.
Yeah.
And there was a time in my life where I discounted all of this. You know, I'm like, remote viewing, sure. Just remote view the lottery and call it a day, like, if it's real. But I've had to reevaluate everything.
I've done an episode on that, by the way.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm at. I'm in this agnostic state where I'm not discounting anything and I'm not swallowing everything whole.
Right.
But there's enough data and real science that has been done on all this phenomenon, whether it's psychic abilities, remote viewing, after-death experiences, orbs, UFOs, all of it. And I don't know how it's interrelated, but it is in some way. So I would just encourage people to do their own due diligence. If you have a story, I encourage people to share. We need to build a community. And the more that we have the courage to come out and talk openly about it, the more the mainstream is going to have to address it. And maybe we'll get some answers finally, if we could put some pressure.
Yeah, the more anecdotes and stories that are out there, the more data we have, right? Yeah. And the easier it will be able to correlate and at least come to some working model about what the heck's really going on with reality and all that. I mean, for all we know, it could just be a simulation, right? You get more of what you look for, right? I'm not saying that's what it is. I hope it's not that, but that actually is the most parsimonious explanation of all this. Like, it explains everything pretty easily. Yeah. So you have to acknowledge that. But anyway, I appreciate hearing your story, Jeff, and I hope it moves, or at least helps move the needle in disclosure, which I think you're going to have popular disclosure as opposed to government-led, because as we were discussing offline, they've done so many things in the last 4 to 8 years that has left their credibility pretty shot in many cases. So,
yeah, I agree.
All right, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Pleasure meeting you at Seoul in person and here, and looking forward to chatting again. I'd like to get all my buddies and have them chat with you. You can hear
100%. Yeah, I definitely want to talk to as many people as possible. So thank you, Jeff. And I'm glad I met you. I would never have met you if I hadn't been at Seoul. So
great.
Appreciate you.
All right, brother. Appreciate your work.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much, and keep watching. I really appreciate it.